You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Public transport's great.
What's not great is that unless you've got a radio with you, you can't listen to 3CR when you're on it.
Until now. The Community Radio Plus app lets you listen to us wherever you are.
Get on board and search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.
Time's on my mind when I had you by my side. Am I thinking loud? Do I want you around? Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction. In the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. And guess what? I'm back. No more boring pre-records that have no reality, no touch with reality. So I'll be looking at reality today, whether you want to look at it or not. If you don't want to look at reality, well, there's other options. So, what's anarchy all about? It's about creating society without rulers. Anarchos without rulers, not without rules. Now, if you're concerned about the state of the world, and everybody is on every day of the week, well, maybe you are, maybe you aren't. The fact is that most of the problems we face as individuals and as communities, as nation states and internationally, is based on the very simple concept that individuals in our political systems have massive amounts of power. Massive amounts of power. And anarchism is about changing that to create a society without rulers, not without rules, without rulers, a society based on the concepts of direct democracy, where the people involved in the decision make that decision and then appoint delegates to carry out those decisions. It's about direct democracy, not about representative democracy, but about direct democracy. It's about creating institutional structures which don't allow individuals or small groups to determine the lives of billions of people as we see today. It's also a society. The other thing we're concerned about is very simple, is the fact that wealth seems to stick to the hands of a minuscule minority. And much of the world's poverty and despair is directly linked to the fact that we live in a society which is based on a profit motive. Capitalism, private investment for private profit. So an anarchist society is a society where wealth is held in common and used for the common good, and where decisions are made by the people affected by those decisions, not representatives. Simple concepts to grasp, difficult concepts to carry out, because of the resistance by those who have power and wealth to our efforts to change society. Now, I have no illusions about how difficult things change is. I don't think anybody has any illusions that listen to the Anarchist World This Week. If you think the revolution's around the corner, if you think we're going to create an egalitarian community tomorrow, that's not going to happen. I mean, what we do is basically a drop in an ocean of indifference. But without that drop, there is no push for change. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, I'm going to start off with a snowflake's chance in hell. Now, those of you who are regular listeners to the Anarchist World This Week know that I've been involved in a number of election campaigns, and people say, why bother? Why bother, Joe? You've got a snowflake's chance in hell of being elected. Now, involvement in election campaigns is not about being elected. It's not even about the distribution of preferences to, progressive candidates. Involvement in federal election campaigns is one of the few times in Australia when people think beyond, well, some people think beyond their immediate needs. And theoretically, as the High Court determined about 30 years ago, that without freedom of speech during an election campaign, there is no election. Theoretically, it's a contest of ideas. Unfortunately, as you and I know, it is not a contest of ideas. It's basically a contest between two individuals which are manipulated by the small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. So involvement in a federal election campaign is about attempting to introduce new ideas in a context where people are thinking about making decisions about who they're going to vote for, which candidate or which political party, has what ideas. Now, not everybody votes on that basis, but a number do, a significant number of do. So I think to stand on the sidelines and decry the whole system is basically a waste of time. It's like pissing in the wind. What happens is you get piss on your face. So that's why I bother. Now, federal elections are difficult processes, and they're difficult because the Australian political system is basically designed to protect the bailiwick of the major political parties in terms of the legislation that goes through Parliament. For example, I'll give you a few examples. If you stand as an independent candidate in the Senate and you have two people standing, you are allowed to have a box above the line. But while everybody else has the name of a registered political party, your box cannot have the word independent next to it. That's right, that's in the legislation. There's also monetary issues regarding election campaigns. To have an effective election campaign in a federal electorate, which has got about 100,000, 120,000 voters, you need about $1 million. That's right. That's the way it is today in 2025. That's the cost of an election campaign. On top of that, you need $2,000 to actually stand as a candidate. And then, on top of that, you've got a fourth estate, including the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which through legislative requirements has no interest in candidates who have ideas that do not fit into the current private investment for private profit motive. Now, we have independent candidates which are called progressives, right? Obviously, we've got the political parties and registered political parties, and you need 1,500 members to be a registered political party. They have an advantage over independent candidates because they don't have to scrounge around getting 100 people to nominate them from that electorate to stand. All they've got to do is pay the deposit and wang bam, That's the way it goes. That's the way it goes. So obviously there are all these disincentives, and there are disincentives for people to stand as candidates in order to limit the extent of debate. Now, what I'm trying to do in the electorate of Flinders, which is a blue ribbon Liberal seat on the outskirts of the city of Melbourne, is something that you could emulate in your part of Australia. It's not something that's difficult. it's hard, but not impossible, to be able to stand as a candidate. You do need to do a little bit of organising. So now we've got progressive candidates. We have political party candidates. But what I'm interested in is looking at the concept, the very important concept of how growing economic inequality creates social division and violence. And what we've seen during the neoliberal revolution, the privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation, deregulation mania which has gripped the world, and especially Australia over the last 50 years, what we have seen is what I call the trickle-down economic theory implemented. Treacle, T-R-E-A-C-L-E, not trickle-down economics, but trickle-down economics. We've seen most of the economic gains that have been made by a minuscule number of people living in this country, a minuscule number. And that minuscule number is so powerful, as we see in the United States of America, that they're able to determine legislation. That's right. So, I'm interested in standing as I've been approached by people in the electorate of Flinders to stand as a candidate. Not because we are going to win the election, but in order to introduce some new ideas into this election campaign. And the ideas that I'm interested, and the people who support this campaign in that particular part of the world are interested in, are things like a universal basic income. We are on the verge of a new revolution. 200 years after the Industrial Revolution. And I'm not talking about the digital revolution, I'm talking about the artificial intelligence revolution. And as I've said in the past, most political, social, economic, cultural change occurs when people's ability in a capitalist society to earn an income is threatened. And the introduction and the widespread application of artificial intelligence in the community will have a severe disruptive influence on society. And many people, and in a capitalist society, if you don't earn, you basically live a subsistence existence. Even in societies like Australia, where we have a social security system. So I think one of the most important ideas we should be promoting today is the idea of a universal basic income for everyone. And those people who think a universal basic income is some type of new radical concept, think again. Go back to the Roman Empire and the massive expansion of the Roman Empire and the massive expansion of the number of slaves which were not paid, who basically ousted the plebeians, who were the Roman citizens who had political rights but no economic rights. And in order to maintain integrity and social cohesion and decrease violence because of the growing economic inequality, what occurred is the bread and circuses era, where basic food, accommodation was subsidised by the Roman state for plebeians, and entertainment. At one stage, at the height of the Roman Empire, I think there were 245 public holidays for plebeians to enjoy themselves watching people being slaughtered in the Colosseum in Rome. But, I'm being a little bit facetious there, but I'm just saying is the concept of a universal basic income is something that we should be discussing as a matter of urgency as the artificial intelligence removes the ability of millions of people to actually earn an income and meet their basic needs. And what that is, the universal basic income, is everybody gets the same income. Those people who continue to be part of the productive system, that income comes back to the state through the taxation system. And those people who decide they don't want to be a wage slave, well, they can basically live the life the way they want. A universal basic income is the panacea to the growing inequality we see in our society because of corporatisation, globalisation, deregulation and privatisation. So this is something that I think is a fundamental political, economic, cultural idea which should be, that seed should be planted in the community today. Right. Next, people talk about diversifying the economy. And what they mean is giving taxpayers' money to the private sector to expand, to provide basic services to the community as a whole, while, making a profit on the side. This is not diversification of the economy. Currently, in Australia, we have the domination of the economic sector, the cultural sector, social sector, by a private investment for private profit mentality, which leads to the creation of duopolies and monopolies. And that's what we see in this country. You walk into any major temple of consumption, any major shopping centre in this country, and you will see the same brands over and over again, and many of those brands belong to the same corporation, although somehow you think it's a different company. It's not. So what privatisation has done is actually put all the balls in the hands of the private sector. When we had companies which provided basic services to the community, which were owned by the state, not by the people, but by the state, what occurred is that there was some competition between the private sector and the state sector. Today, there is no competition. And those of you who are lulled into a false sense of security, believing that privatisation was going to deliver the goods, are now reaping the benefits of privatisation. Now, in order to diversify the Australian economy, we need to create competition. I know, it's a terrible word, isn't it? Competition within the economy. You do this in two ways. One, you do this by reintroducing state-owned entities to provide essential services. That's what happened. Has workers' demands for reforms and revolutions forced the state to change its operations from a system of control which allowed those who exercise power to continue to exercise power to see some sharing of the commonwealth. What we've seen during the globalisation, privatisation, deregulation and corporatisation revolution is we've seen a reversal in that role. And many of the gains that were made through the blood, sweat and tears of millions of Australians and millions of people across this country, across the planet, billions of people, have now been whittled away. The third tier that I'm interested in, and that a lot of, when I say I'm talking about a lot of people. Anything I'm talking about, in a lifetime, and I'm over 70, in a lifetime you're lucky to have one original idea, all right? Now, I haven't found that original idea yet. But another way to diversify the economy and introduce competition and provide valuable employment is through the creation of a third tier of the Australian economy based on cooperatives and collectives. Now, if you want to form a cooperative and collective and you don't have the necessary resources to set up the cooperative or collective, no way any financial institution in this country is going to give you the seeding funding. And what I'll be proposing during the selection campaign, which I propose on this program over and over again, is that 1% of superannuation contributions be set aside to be used as seeding funding for cooperatives and collectives. Some will prosper, some will fail. But I think in the end, the money which is set aside will provide not only consumer services and goods, but also provide stable, long-term employment for people who are not interested in being part of a wage slave in the private sector, or are not interested in working for the state. So these are three tiers of a mixed economy. The private sector, the national sector or the state sector, and a sector based on cooperatives and collectives. So these are the type of things I would like to talk about during this election campaign. Now, you notice there's a goods and services tax, GST. Now, goods and services taxes are retrogressive taxes. Although people who earn more will pay more for goods and services because of a goods and services tax, people on low incomes and social security benefits are hardest hit because 10% of the minuscule amount they have to survive goes in a goods and services tax. So it has a major impact on those who have the least. Now, the interesting thing about these taxes is there's no financial taxes. And what I'm interested in raising during the Flinders election, the federal election, is the concepts of actually having taxes on financial transactions. For example, a 1% financial turnover or a 1% financial transaction tax on transactions over $5,000. That would bring in at least $120 billion a year into the Treasury. And think of what you can do with $120 billion for public health, public education, public infrastructure. And also, the other financial tax I'm interested in is a 1% stock market turnover tax. Today, we have the ridiculous situation of people who have got the disposable income to invest in the stock market here and overseas, stock markets here and overseas, have a taxation advantage over wage earners. So I don't think it's a big ask to ask for a 1% stock market turnover tax. And considering everything is now digitalised as far as the stock market is concerned, it's a simple tax to collect. Very simple tax to collect. And that should raise at least $40 billion a year for the Federal Treasury. Now, those of you who've relied on Uncle Sam to look after us in this situation we find ourselves in. Now, if there's one thing you can say about the United States of America, and I'm not just talking about the period where President Bufalini is in charge, the buffoon is in charge. I'm talking about over decades, whether it's Democratic or Republican. The only thing United States administrations have ever been interested in is the integrity of the United States of America. Their intervention overseas has been disastrous. Look at Vietnam, Afghanistan, just to number a few. Look at what's happened in those situations. When they talk about cutting and running, if it doesn't suit the United States, as we're seeing currently in the Ukraine, if it doesn't suit the United States, they're more than happy to turn their back on their allies. This is not just, Bufalini and his mob who are now in charge of the United States of America. This is administration after administration. And for us as a nation to think that our security is dependent on kowtowing, not bending, but kowtowing, kissing the ring of the United States of America is ludicrous. Not only is it ludicrous, it is dangerous. Because we live in a different part of the world. I've been travelling over the last few weeks. And if you think who are important. We're not as a country. But the fact is, we live in this part of the world, and we need to understand that our security as a nation is not based on slavishly following United States foreign policy, United States initiatives, but it is dependent on us having a non-aligned, independent foreign policy, and we need to drastically reduce defence ties with the United States of America, because the way we are now intertwined in the United States industrial, military, digital complex is a pathway to disaster, a pathway to the destruction of this country. And it's something that should be discussed, not put aside. It should be discussed. And that's another issue I'm interested in raising during this federal election campaign. Now, I can raise all these ideas on this program, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. What matters is getting out there. And I'm hoping that other people around the country listening to the Anarchist World This Week via the Community Radio Network, all the radio stations, community radio stations across this country listening to the Anarchist World This Week, there may be individuals or groups within listening to this program who will take up the same issues. Now, it's important that we reboot the failing reconciliation process by beginning negotiations with this country's First Nations people on a variety of issues, truth-telling, treaty, etc. Over 235 years after colonisation began, we continue to deny what occurred and the profound impact colonial policies and current-day policies have had on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So this is something else I'm interested in taking up. When we talk about nationalisation, let's talk about a new public bank. When the Commonwealth Bank existed before it was privatised by a previous Labor government, before it was privatised, it acted as a brake on the avarice and greed of the privately owned banks. Once the Commonwealth Bank was privatised, there is no handbrake on what they will do in order to increase their profitability in terms of, screwing their customers and their employees. But this time, if we're going to create a new public bank, we should incorporate its ownership in the Australian Constitution. The weakness about having nationally owned infrastructure and banks is that their ownership belongs to the government of the day. And if the government of the day feels it's right to privatise, whether it's an airport, whether it's a port, whether it's this, whether it's that, whether it's in underwear, they'll do it. Because there is no inhibition to the government of the day making decisions which have an impact for generations. So all new public institutions that provide services, their ownership should be incorporated in the Australian Constitution. That means if a government of the day wants to sell them, they'd have to go to a referendum in order to get permission of the real owners, not the government of the day, but the people of this country. That's another idea I'm interested in, raising. Another idea is we should be living in the land of milk and honey. I've been travelling recently to some exceptionally poor places on the planet. And I can tell you that if they had the resources we had, and they had the minuscule population we have, that everybody in this country would be living the life of Riley. You wouldn't need private charities to advertise, to raise money, to send Australian kids to Australian public schools. You wouldn't need the 33,000 charities which are registered who are doing good work in a variety of ways, raising funds to tackle issues which should be tackled by governments at the federal, state and local level. So I think the most controversial aspect of the ideas which I want to float, if I get the 100 people to nominate me in the electorate of Flinders, is nationalising without compensation all mineral resource corporations, both foreign-owned and locally owned, with an annual turnover over $100 million. Now, about 2% of the Australian population is involved in the mining industry. But the people who own the rights to exploit the resources under the ground, which belong to the Commonwealth, that's right, the Commonwealth, that's us, of Australia, are making hay while denying the rest of us the privilege of living in the land of milk and honey. Denying First Nations people and the rest of us that privilege. These are corporations which pay minimal if no taxation, make billions of dollars of profit, pay minuscule voluntary taxation, minuscule royalties, and laugh at us every day of the week because of our stupidity as a nation to allow private corporations to exploit resources under the ground in this country which theoretically belong to all of us. So why shouldn't we nationalise without compensation? They've made enough profit. It's about time the resources we as a people own should be used to look after our interests. Now, those of you who are concerned about the growing divisions in Australian society, which are stoked to a large degree by political parties and people in authority, corporations, which are stoked to divide us as a people, to avert our gaze from the reality we face on a day-to-day basis, where we theoretically live in a society rich in resources, rich in potential. But we find most people spending most of their time working in order to pay for their day-to-day costs, not even able to afford housing, indebted for generations. We now have intergenerational mortgages where when you die you pass it on to your kids. It's crazy. And the damage that's been caused by privatisation of the nursing home sector, privatisation of the early education sector, privatisation, of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, where private entities are now exploiting the scheme for their own and their members' financial gain. It's just crazy that we allow this to happen. Every day, go onto social media, pick up a newspaper, watch TV, pay TV, whatever, and guess what? The same problems over and over and over again. No solutions. We're told there is no other way but a private investment for private profit mentality, which has infected the nation worse than COVID-19. It's infected the way we think. So, am I wasting my time? Possibly. But the thing about change is that without ideas, there is no change. If you look at revolutionary movements and reform movements which have come and gone in the past, they started with an idea or a range of ideas which was taken up by more and more and more people. So I am interested and stand in the federal election, the electorate of Flinders. People from that electorate approached me to see whether I was interested in standing, and I said I was, but on one condition. And that condition is that we are able to obtain the support of 100 people in the electorate of Flinders who are willing to nominate me to stand on a radical platform. Not a progressive platform, but a radical platform, a radical economic platform. And obviously, on top of that, we should always be looking at fast-tracking renewable energy transition to deal with the climate emergency. Now, the big debate today is, and many of the people listening to this program in Queensland and northern New South Wales will be facing a cyclone. Cyclones are exceptionally rare in this part of the country. We have bushfires, and people say, oh, we always have bushfires. We have floods. Oh, we always have floods. The fact is that these are things that we need to tackle and we need to discuss. Now, if you're interested in running in the federal election in your part of the world and you want some advice, I'm happy to talk to you. You can email me at info@pibci.net. Now, I turned off the phones when I went away 2.5 weeks ago. I needed to, get a bit of energy for this campaign. But the phones are back on. So you can always leave a message from today onwards on 0439 395 489. If you're in the electorate of Flinders and you're interested in nominating me to stand in that electorate, give us a call, 0439 395 489. Otherwise, I'm inviting you to a big picnic by the seaside. You like that? This Sunday, the 9th of March, if you find yourself, in the environs of Melbourne, midday to 3 p.m, a picnic for the Flinders, for Toscana for Flinders campaign. Sea Winds, SEAWINDS Garden. Sea Winds Garden, which is part of the Arthur's Seat State Park in Dramana. Arthur's Seat State Park, Purvis, Purves Road, Arthur's Seat, and Melway reference 159E12. You want more information? Go on the Facebook page, Joseph Toscana. It's there. If you want to talk to me about it, leave a message on 0439 395 489. Now, if you're coming to the picnic this Sunday on the 9th of March to look at this proposition of, running in the electorate of Flinders for the forthcoming federal election, bring food and drinks to share. All right. I've put that on the agenda. It's up to you. If we get the numbers, we run. If we don't get the numbers, we don't run. We do what we can with what we've got. You can't expect anything else. But I think the important thing is that we remember that without intervention, nothing changes. Let's move on. With friends like these, who needs enemies? Poor Ukraine. Goaded by the West to join NATO. Goaded by the West to not negotiate with the Russians, who are concerned about their borders, irrespective of what you think. Now they're being thrown to the wind by their allies. And the key word is allies. And I say to all of us, with friends like these, who needs enemies? And this is a pertinent lesson for us in Australia. If we hang on, not hang on, but if our hands are sewn into the coattails of the United States military-industrial complex, which has a history of stabbing its allies in the back when it no longer suits their interests, we are in for an exceptionally difficult time. We don't live on the west coast of America. We live in Southeast Asia. That's where we live. our neighbours, geographically, is not the United States. And for us, as we've done time and time again over the last 70 years, thrown in our lot of the United States of America, it's the highway to disaster. Highway to disaster. We should be, and I've said it on this program year after year after year, looking at an independent, non-aligned foreign policies. That is the best way to ensure security. Not tagging along with some bully of a country that thinks it's exceptional. So think about it. Listen to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. My name is Joseph Toscano. I'm hosting today's program. Can't believe it. Can you believe it? Nobody wants to say boo to Bufalini. You know, the President of the United States, the buffoon whose mannerisms closely resemble the mannerisms of Mussolini, who came to a very sticky end. Bufalini. Extraordinary. Now, as I said before the election, the American people have made this choice and they can lie in it. It's their problem. But unfortunately, it's become our problem because we are intertwined. Our defence system, our military system is intertwined with the American system. So it's becoming our problem. So think about it. So if you think the way forward is all the way of the USA, you're kidding. You're really kidding. You know? Now, what I love about this country, I was born here, all right? What I love about this country is how the high priests of hate, and currently the high priest of hate, I think, is the honourable leader of the opposition, Mr. Peter Dutton, widening the rhetoric-reality gap. See, we have an interesting mixture of people in this country. Because as part of the, colonial empires, we have relied on a high rate of migration in order to prosper. That's been the way forward. After World War II, when Australia had a population of around 5 million, the cry was populate or perish. Initially, we populated with the people who had survived World War II from Europe, but then the migration system expanded. Now, for the high priest of hate, that's right, the high priest of hate, Mr. Peter Dutton, to use the authority he has as opposition leader and a potential Prime Minister to actually widen the gap between different groups of people in our society is totally unacceptable. Because you see, we are diverted time and time and time and time and time again by the divisions, most of them artificial, which are created by people like Mr. Dutton in order to advance their political ideology. Because hate and fear is a great mobiliser, as we see in war after war after war. Hate and fear, brilliant mobiliser, but it creates massive issues within society. Now, to me and to you, the problem isn't somebody who's been dispossessed and marginalised, whether they're First Nations people, whether they're recently arrived migrants, whether they're people of a different gender, different sexual orientation, speak different languages, different cultural practices, different religions. Obviously there are differences. But to create a climate which allows individuals in society and groups in society which want to divide us on the basis of gender or sexual orientation or culture or language or religion is the very thing that keeps those who are in power today in power today. Because while we squabble amongst ourselves about things which are relatively minor issues, for example, the big debate about marriage equality, the referendum, well, it wasn't a referendum, sorry, otherwise it would be in the Australian Constitution. The plebiscite which was held allowed people, same-sex couples, to get married. Did the end of the earth come? Remember the divisive debates about the fact that it was going to be the end of civilization as we knew it? And that's the issue. While we fight amongst each other, we forget who has the foot on our necks, who's kicking us while we're on the ground. It's that 1% that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication who amass extraordinary profits and have extraordinary power to determine the parliamentary agenda, who destroy the future for you and your children and your grandchildren. And while we squabble amongst ourselves about relatively minor issues, they will be making hay at our expense. And that's what we see today. A private investment for private profit mentality means that profitability is the only thing that matters. Social cohesion doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. All that matters is increasing profitability, irrespective of the human, social, environmental costs. Why have so many sections of Australian society been fighting about the concept of climate change and climate emergency? As if it doesn't exist. The great thing about reality is it bites you in the bum sooner or later. Whether you believe it or not, it bites you in the bum. So irrespective of what our political leaders say, the fact is that real power does not lie in Parliament. It lies in the boardrooms of national and transnational corporations. In order to break that monopoly, in order to stop Australians, the majority of Australians, surviving on the crumbs which are brushed off the corporate table in our direction, which we squabble and fight over amongst ourselves, we need to cut that leg on the corporate table, which will allow profits to spill everywhere and benefit everyone. That's what change is about. There are progressive candidates on social issues, fine. But the fact is, ultimately, growing economic inequality equals entrenched economic privilege, equals social dislocation, destruction of social cohesion, and increasing violence at the community. Whether it's violence at the individual level or violence at a state level, that is the equation. That is the path we as a people are going down. That's the path. And if you don't believe me, why should you believe me? Look at history. Look at history. Look at the major changes which have occurred in history all over the world, all different cultures. As economic inequality grows, entrenched economic privilege grows, social dislocation, violence increases. It's like night following day. It's a fact. And that's the pathway we as a people are following today. Let's move on. Now, I know that some of you love your football. And I'm not talking about football as, as the rest of the world knows it's soccer. And I know I love your sport, cricket, polo, I'm just joking, golf, whatever. Now, have you noticed how in the last decades or two, how a simple pleasure for so many has become some type of pathway for financial nirvana for a minority? I'll give you an example. Now, watching the footy, AFL, Australian Football League, on Saturday afternoon with your mates and family has been on free TV, because a lot of people can't afford to go or it's in another state, has been a byword for Australian culture. Saturday afternoon watching your footy team, the AFL footy team, on free-to-air television. Guess what in 2025? It's not going to happen. That's right, boys and girls. It is not going to happen. The rights have been sold to Fox and I think Kale, whatever they call themselves, some sporting channel. Now, you can watch free-to-air TV on Thursday and Friday and Sunday afternoon. And the AFL says, you are now watching more games, boys and girls, be happy. But the fact is, this is not the beginning of the end, it is the end. And look, I've got a peripheral interest in AFL because if you live in Melbourne, where I do, well, where I used to, where you do, you really need to know about the AFL, or you add a lot of conversation. I'm boycotting the AFL. Boycotting them. And I'm suggesting you do the same. If you go to football, you spend the time going to watch your team, paying good money, and the rest of the time you like to watch your footy on free-to-air TV on Saturday, I suggest you boycott. But not only should you boycott, what you should do is you should write to Mr. Dillon or email him. Don't telephone. They don't care about telephone calls. And say, look, I've been going to the footy for the last 47 years and now I'm boycotting the AFL for what they've done. Because the thing is that if you don't boycott them, they'll continue to erode what little pleasure people are freely able to obtain, who cannot afford the extraordinary prices which people need to pay to go to the footy these days. So think about it. It's the same in every other aspect of society. We're seeing more and more public events becoming privatised. And if you haven't got the bucks to enjoy them, well, you don't enjoy it. End of story. So boycott, B-O-Y-C-O-T-T, the AFL. And if you're concerned about Buffalini and the policies, the fact that everybody is frightened to say anything against Mr. Buffalini, the President of the United States of America, the buffoon, they're too frightened. I mean, it's pathetic when you see world leaders grovelling and kowtowing to Mr. Buffalini or Mr. Putin or Mr. Netanyahu, a war criminal like Mr. Putin. Well, boycott it. You've got that economic power. You don't have to buy US shit. You don't have to buy Israeli shit. You can boycott it. It's not going to make much difference to your life, but it does make some difference. And if you use Amazon and all those other, and Uber and all those other stuff, think about it. You're supporting that very system which you have campaigned against for so long. So how you spend your consumer dollars is important. Well, thank you for listening to The Anarchist World this week. I'm happy to be back. Hopefully I'll be back for a while. So if you're interested in the ideas, give us a ring on 0439 395 489. I've cleared the full message bank. Hallelujah. You can email me at info@pibci.net or anarchistage@yahoo.com. Facebook page, Joseph Toscano. Web pages, anarchistmedia.org, info@pibsy.net or pibsy.net, YouTube channels, public interest before corporate interest. It goes on and on and on and on. The usual garbage, you know. But the important thing is get involved, start thinking about things. You are the catalyst for change. Nobody else is going to do it. If you don't act, nobody else will. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station, courtesy of those wonderful people at the Community Radio Network. Listen in to The Anarchist World this week. Next week, see you at the picnic at Seawinds if you're interested in the Toscano for Flinders campaign.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World this week. Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to The Anarchist World this week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
You might have heard about the Community Radio Plus app, but it's only when you start using it that you'll wonder how you lived without it.
You can listen to us wherever you are, at home, work, driving.
On public transport, gardening, protesting, or even in the bath.
Just search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.